Good afternoon, everyone, and welcome back to my channel. It is an absolutely beautiful day here in northeast Kansas. 64 degrees. This is the type of weather that I just love. You get up in the morning, it's a little chilly out, and it warms up to the 60s. It's a little windy today, but other than that, absolutely beautiful. I hope everyone is enjoying themselves, enjoying this fall weather. I wanted to talk a little bit today about the comfort, convenience, and technology features of this car. So the last video that I did, I spoke about driving dynamics, and I actually had a comment. One person said, does it drive as well as the W124? And so I had a knee-jerk reaction to that. It was, well, absolutely not. It's not even close. But then I had to walk that back a little bit, right? Because it just depends on what you want out of your car. So if you want something that's a little sportier, firmer suspension, a little bit heavier steering, more powerful engine, but, less comfort and less quiet, but more sporty, then it's an emphatic yes. So this is a actually much better driving car if you value those aspects rather than comfort and quiet. This car is much more firm, much sportier, it's noisier, and that's not to say that it's pretty well muted as far as wind noise goes. There is some road noise, and I'm sure you can probably hear it. I'm at around 70 miles per hour now, and I'm sure you can hear the road noise coming through, and that's just kind of a product of being a little bit lower quality than the W124, but also having a much wider footprint on the tire than the W124 does. So that makes a huge difference when it comes to road noise, and also ride quality, because this is a much bigger wheel, so there's less sidewall flex, and it just firms things up a lot. But it does help the car corner flatter, so there are upsides to having that firmer ride. It's just not something that really does a lot for me at my age. I'm not really interested in driving aggressively like I once did. Occasionally I'll kind of, put it on the floor, accelerating up an on-ramp or something like that. It's definitely a lot more fun when driving a little bit more aggressively like that than the W124. And of course, I'm talking about my W24, which is a 300E 2.8. I've actually turned it over to the stepson. He's enjoying that. But, if you're talking about a 500E or something like that, obviously that's a different animal. That probably compares a lot more to this as far as power and handling goes. But so anyway, talking about comfort, and I mentioned the seats a little bit. This is not the most comfortable Mercedes that I've ever been in. In fact, it's the least. But Mercedes sets the bar pretty high. So by those standards, this car is the least comfortable that I've ever owned, or that I've ever driven, for that matter, in a Mercedes Benz. And that's not to say it's horribly uncomfortable or anything like that. I just want you to be prepared. If you're looking into a car like this and you like the softer ride, this isn't that car. The steering is fairly heavy at low speeds, but it does lighten up at speed. I think the steering is just about perfect at highway speeds, and I think that's probably what they were going for when they tuned the steering in this car, is that they wanted it to be a little bit under assisted at low speed, because then that lightens it up, but it's still firm enough to where you have good control, and you can be really precise with the steering at highway speeds. But it does make things a little heavier at lower speeds. Again, it kind of reminds me of an E39, just the weight of the steering at low speeds, not the dynamics or anything else, not the geometry of the steering. This is definitely different, but the weight is similar at low speeds. So talking about comfort, talking about the seats, these are very firm, and a lot of the complaints, I don't want to say complaints because I'm nitpicking here, right? I'm nitpicking when I say, it's the least comfortable Mercedes that I've ever driven. I am nitpicking. It's not horribly uncomfortable or anything like that. It just doesn't have as much cushion, as much comfort as other Mercedes Benz products that I've driven, and a lot of that has to do with the seats being so firm. There's just not a whole lot of padding on them. Since I'm stopped, I feel comfortable here showing you There's just not, it's very, very firm. There's not a whole lot of padding. And furthermore, these side bolsters are actually rather aggressive. So it has the aggressive side bolsters, which is fine, because anytime you're cornering, you want something to kind of keep you in that seat. The problem is they're close enough together to where they're more set up for somebody who's, I don't know, maybe 190 pounds. And, you know, I'm 6'1", 250, and it's just not made for somebody my size. It's just, it's a little, it hugs me a little bit too tight on the outsides. But that's my fault, that's not theirs. I mean, they can't make a one-size-fits-all seat, so I'm just a little bigger than what this seat was designed for. So if you're somebody my size and you're a little bigger, you know, the side bolsters might hug you a little bit too tight. And I do know the CLK 320, which is the 6-cylinder version of this car, I believe it does have the same seats, but I've also read where the suspension is softer in that car. So that's something to consider. I've never driven one, but I have heard it from multiple sources, forums and whatnot, that the suspension is more firm on the CLK 430 than it is on the CLK 320. So something to think about. If you're not too concerned with the overall horsepower of the engine, you're not concerned with, you know, spirited driving, with, you know, going through corners real hard at higher speeds, the CLK 320 might be for you. Just something to consider. But, you know, overall, it's not a car that I'm going to complain about. It's just not a car that I'm blown away with the comfort and you know, how quiet and how pleasurable it is to drive. This is a fun car to drive, don't get me wrong. It's absolutely a fun car to drive, but for different reasons, right? When you're just puttering along, you're obeying the speed limit, and you're not pushing it through corners, and you're not accelerating hard, it's just not as pleasurable to drive as, say, a W124 is. But that's just me. That's my preference. If you like it a little on the firmer side, you'll be just fine with it. It does have some features, obviously, that the W124 didn't have. The W124 that I own was made in 1993. So just by default, since technology and, you know, features have grown since then, you know, to 2000, which was when this car was built, it just naturally has more stuff, more, oh, that's cool type features, you know. For one, it has the memory seating ×3 for both driver and passenger, which I was pretty impressed with. Being a 2000 model, I was pretty impressed that it had 3 memory settings for both driver and passenger. I thought that was really cool. It has the rain sensing mono wiper. Now the W124 has a mono wiper, but it didn't have the rain sensing feature. So this one, you set it on the first setting and it will actually pick up rain that is hitting your windshield. It senses that and it will turn the wiper on according to the frequency of raindrops hitting your windshield. So in heavier rain, it'll kind of go crazy, and lighter rain, it'll wipe it once in a while. But, you know, if you folks have never seen the mono wiper, I'll turn it on here. Just a really, really cool piece of German engineering there. It kind of reaches out to the corners and then it pulls itself back in the center, and it does a really good job really cleaning, you know, a really large percentage of the windshield. I've always thought the mono wiper was cool, and it's even better with this rain sensing feature where you can just kind of set it and forget it. You don't have to worry about, you know, speeding it up or slowing it down. It does everything for you, and it does work really well. It's not like it just freaks out and goes nuts with a little bit of rain, or it under cleans, you know, when you've got a heavier rain. It seems to be very receptive to the amount of rain that's hitting that windshield. So I love it. It also has xenon headlights. That's something that the 123 or the 124, excuse me, doesn't have. Excuse me here just a second. I'm gonna merge onto the highway. But the xenon headlamps are low beam only. So this is not a bi-xenon setup. It has xenon headlamps on the low beam, but the high beam is still incandescent. So the high beam is still just like any other car that you'll see from this era. But xenons were kind of a big deal. It's a pretty expensive option back in 2000. So back then, big deal. Now, not so much. They've got a lot of cars with LEDs and, you know, other different types of headlights, and it's just not a big deal anymore. But it kind of was back then. Also, it has the 6-disc CD changer, and there's no option to play CDs in the W124. This is not a big deal now, but it was in 2000. So the stereo actually does, that center section folds down. And that center section folds down, there's actually a cassette opening there, and you can play cassettes. I have no idea who owns cassettes, and as a matter of fact, I didn't even have any CDs anymore prior to purchasing this car. I just didn't. I've been rid of those for a long time, but I thought, you know what, I'd like to just see if it works and just listen to some CDs. So I did. I went out and I bought 4 or 5 CDs, and I've got them loaded up in there. It works flawlessly. The CD changer magazine is kind of suspended. It just kind of floats in there, so whenever you hit bumps, it doesn't skip or anything else. It works great. I've never had a CD skip on it, and so that's actually pretty enjoyable. I remember the taste of CDs, and I didn't think that, you know, I would be here talking about how, you know, CDs were, you know, a thing of the past, but here we are, right? But I also have a Bluetooth adapter, so I can listen to music on my phone, and it's an FM transmitter is all it is. So it communicates with your phone via Bluetooth, and it sends out an FM frequency, and you just tune your radio to that, and it works really well too. I mean, the sound quality is not perfect, but it's pretty good too. So if you're an audiophile, you won't necessarily be blown away by the stereo system and, you know, the speakers in this car. Obviously, they're not the greatest by today's technology anyway, by today's standards, but also they're 22 years old, so even the 22-year-old technology has degraded by 22 years, so the speaker cones and the surrounds and everything are, you know, they've got 22 years of age on them, so they don't sound as good as they once did, and even when they did, they weren't as good as, you know, modern speaker systems. So don't expect anything crazy there. But this car was actually also available with one of the first command systems that'll have a navigation screen, and the early command system, which everybody hates. I've never owned a car with it, so, you know, let me know if I'm wrong here, but everything that I've heard about the early command systems, they were really, really slow to respond. Sometimes they didn't respond. They weren't the most intuitive. A lot of people were just really frustrated with those early systems. So a lot of people who shop for these cars actually look at the early command and navigation system as a negative rather than a positive, because it's just so counterintuitive. So something to think about there too. And that's just from my research. Again, I've never owned one, so I can't speak from personal experience. But this car does have a few of those, you know, similar features with the 124 that I really loved, that were, you know, pretty groundbreaking in the early 90s when that 124 was built. The power headrests on the front seats, the power rear headrests that drop down out of the way. You know, if you're up here, you're looking in your rear view, there's nobody sitting back there, but your headrests are in the way of your view. You just push a button here on the dash. You can see it marked there next to the hazard button, and it drops those out of the way. The 124 does the same thing. It's really, really neat. Just to gain that visibility, you don't have to stop and get out and go back there. You just push a button and they drop for you. So awfully nice feature. Another thing that I really like about this car, this is the only car that I've ever had that does this, but it actually has the capacity of the fuel tank. So if you look there, I don't know if the glare, if you look there, it says content, and it tells you the capacity of the fuel in your tank. And I thought that was really neat. Now, distance to empty, which it also has, is a much more usable unit of measurement. It has both, but I do think that it's pretty neat to look in there and see, you know, how much fuel is in there. Not just, oh, it's, you know, 3/8 of a tank or anything like that. It actually tells you 14.2 gallons remaining in your tank. So I actually kind of like that. Again, here's the very common issue with the clock. You know, it's 2:49, but you can see that it's a little difficult to read because there are a couple of pixels missing. I thought I was going to luck out on that. I started driving this car, and a couple of ailments that it had kind of started to repair themselves, which is odd enough. It seemed to have a pretty noticeable leak at the rear main seal, and I started driving this car on a daily basis, and it all but completely went away. And I don't know, I've never seen that happen before. I don't know if that's a common deal when you're talking about a car that just wasn't driven and hasn't been. I believe the last owner, prior to my ownership, the guy who owned this last, I want to say he put 800 miles on it in 2 years, according to Carfax. So it sat a lot. And I wonder if that just kind of hardened that seal up, and that, you know, I decided I was going to drive it on a daily basis, and that helped that seal. But I'm telling you folks, I've never seen it before. If somebody would have told me this, I would have thought they were full of it, but it is all but completely disappeared. So I don't know. But in addition to that, that clock started working just fine. Those couple of missing pixels there came back to life. And I thought, you know what? This car just needed to be driven. That's all it needed. You just needed to drive this car a little bit, and just the very couple of minor things that I saw wrong with it. Well, not that a rear main seal is a minor thing, but it wasn't leaking bad enough to where I had to get it fixed immediately, because it wasn't, I mean, we're talking just a few drips here and there. And then obviously the missing pixels on the clock. But, you know, after about a week or so of the clock working fine, that went away as well, went right back to where it was with the missing pixels. So I didn't quite luck out like I thought. But that's one of the things about this car that, you know, it just didn't meet the same standards as the predecessors, the 124s and the 123s, the 126s. They were just built absolutely the best materials, the best everything. And this is an era, you hear people talk about Mercedes kind of starting to cheapen up their cars a little bit in this era, and that's not wrong. That's not incorrect. And that doesn't mean that everybody's trying to poo-poo on these cars. It was a fact. They had to do that. Lexus was making cars that were competitive with the quality and the luxuriousness and the comfort, and they were doing so for less money. So Mercedes had to do something, and they decided that they were going to start building to a price point instead of building to a quality standard. And they're still a great car. Nobody's comparing these to a Cavalier. I mean, it's a much, much better car. But one of the places that they did start to shave cost was with the interior. The interior materials aren't as high quality. The switch gear and the climate control units and all those things, I mean, they're nothing special about them. They do last. I mean, if you look at all these switches, none of them have, you know, any of the printing rubbed off on them. You know, everything's fine. All the switches still work and everything. But I mean, they're the same from, you know, the entry-level C-Class all the way up through the S-Class, everything pretty much, that all looks exactly the same for the most part with the switch gear. And, you know, they had to kind of cut some costs somewhere, and this is kind of where they did it. The paint quality is still excellent on this car. The body lines, with the body gaps with each panel are still perfect. So it's still a very well-built car. They just kind of used some cheaper materials, especially in the interior, and that's where they shaved their cost. And they didn't make it a cheap car, they just made it more competitively priced with the other cars in that segment that were really coming for them from Japan. So they had to do it. But yeah, I mean, as far as technology goes in this car, you're not going to be blown away by it, right? Like, nothing in this car screams way ahead of its time. But there are a couple of things like the rain sensing wiper and the xenon headlamps, and it does have the power rear sunshade and just some things like that in 2000 were a big deal. They're just really not now. So keep in mind that this is a 22-year-old vehicle. You're not going to be blown away by any of the technology in it, but it gives you just enough. It's not overly complex where it's going to be a headache to repair gadgets constantly going wrong or anything else. It's just a fairly basic car. And remember, this is on the C-Class platform. So even though it has some massaged E-Class sheet metal and it looks like the same front end, this is on the C-Class platform, so this isn't, you know, the top of the line vehicle for this time. This isn't a CL, this isn't an S-Class, this is, you know, more of the entry-level type vehicle. But it does have the healthy V8 in it, and a good sturdy 5-speed automatic that's seemingly bulletproof, and that's kind of what I wanted. I wanted something that was going to be reliable, and something that I didn't have to mess with a lot, and so far that's been this car. So that's all I have for today, folks. Just wanted to talk to you a little bit about you know, comfort and convenience and technology features, and that's all I've got for today. So until next time, folks, have a great day.